Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with AudioEye, Debunking Common Myths About Digital Accessibility. My name is Lizzie. I am a Senior Account Manager for Locology, and I will be your host for today's event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with a presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. I'm going to go ahead and send it over to our senior analyst with Locology, Charles Laughlin, to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar, a really interesting topic. So I am joined today by Ty Demore, who's VP of Strategic Partnerships at AudioEye, and I'm going to hand it over to Ty to lead us through the presentation, and then we'll have some questions at the end. Ty?
Sounds good. Thank you so much for the introduction, and really happy to be here today. Again, my name is Ty Demore. I'm the VP of Strategic Partnerships over here at AudioEye. Looking forward to chatting today and debunking common myths about digital accessibility. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. A little bit about AudioEye before diving in. AudioEye is an organization that focuses on making sure that websites and all digital assets are accessible for people with disabilities. We were founded in 2005 as an R&D firm innovating in digital accessibility. We actually have a pretty cool story as to how we came about. We have two founders that were brothers, and they were running a pretty big tech organization that was building websites for large enterprises. One of the brothers got diagnosed with a disease in his eyes that will lose his vision over the next 25 to 30 years, and really started looking at how do people with low vision, how do people with disabilities access the web. Now, back in 2005, when the web was very static, there wasn't that much, JavaScript or React or so forth on the web. It was a pretty accessible web, but we were starting to see new technologies being introduced that were making it so that people with disabilities couldn't access the web. And what our founders saw is that there was a huge opportunity for us to be able to come into websites and make them accessible, because by making sites accessible, by making digital properties accessible, it's going to create more independence for individuals with disabilities. So that's really our foundation story. We are, at the core, focusing only on digital accessibility, and we're committed to building the best technology and services towards making sure that the web is accessible for people with disabilities, apps, PDFs, so forth. So we're going to start off about myths about digital accessibility. So today, one of the things that is constant with digital accessibility is there's so many things thrown around there, right? Websites don't have to be accessible. Websites are only accessible for people that are blind. People that are blind don't even access sites. So we're going to debunk some of these today and really chat through what is digital accessibility, what audience does it serve, and what are the legal risk and legal requirements for making your site accessible. So the first thing is, what is digital accessibility? Digital accessibility is making sure that individuals with disabilities have access to your digital content. The first time, I always tell a story, the first time that I worked in digital accessibility, I think for the longest times, my friends and family thought I was trying to make Wi-Fi available. They didn't really understand how do people that are low vision blind access the web. And the easiest way that I've always explained it is the ramps and rails of the digital world. If you were to walk into Target or to your bank today, they would have an entire architecture design that made sure that individuals with disabilities have equal access. Well, it's no different than what we see on websites, on mobile devices, apps, any type of digital product out there. There's a certain set in which we have to develop and in which we have to code to make sure that these sites are accessible for people with disabilities. So myth number one that we're gonna chat about today is only a small percentage of the population has a disability. And this is something that we commonly get when talking with clients is, hey, am I making my site only accessible for people that are blind? Am I, what is the reach that this has? And the reach always starts to really open the doors for everyone, because it's 1 in 4 people worldwide live with a form of disability. And then the other statistic within that is, within that 1 in 4 people worldwide that have a disability, 75% of those people with disabilities use computers regularly. So to think of that 25% of the population, and of that 25%, majority of them are utilizing digital, access and digital content, is a really big number.
Yeah, Ty, I have to say that I'm a little stunned at how big these numbers are. I mean, it's more of a observation than a question. I think most of us probably coming into this would not have thought 1 in 4 would not have seen these numbers and thought it would be anything close to this. And I think is it part of this, the definition of what counts as disability much more expansive than people realize, or are there just a lot more people out there with the disabilities that require your services?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both, right? If we're kind of looking at these numbers here, 1.8 billion live with a disability, and I would say, there's a lot of disabilities out there that people are affected by consuming digital content when we start looking beyond just low vision or visual impairments, right? When we start to look at things from the perspective of how does someone with how does someone with Parkinson's access a website? Because maybe they cannot control a mouse or a keyboard, so how do they navigate? How does somebody that has ADHD navigate a website? So I think that the numbers are even. I would say that the numbers are probably even bigger than 1 in 4. Also because of just identification of your disability and self-identification if I do have a disability. But the thing that amazes me at AudioEye is that we're constantly finding new innovative ways as well to engage the community. Whether it's looking at cognitive disabilities, it's looking at learning disabilities, it's looking at the way that someone that doesn't have use of their hands navigates a site. Is it voice navigation? How can we do that? So I think it would be a little bit of both, and we're still not even done scratching the surface on ways that we can increase penetration. And another thing that I always say, Charles, is how many of us increase the font size on our iPhones, right?
No comment.
So that's exactly, that's an assistive technology, right? That feature within an iPhone came from their accessibility organization.
Right.
So those are little things that we're constantly looking at that are helping us all access, the content.
Great.
And then speaking of numbers, one of the big ones here as well is 13 trillion combined annual income of people with disabilities, friends, and family. And why we always talk on this number is that there's a huge disposable income for individuals with disabilities that are going to support organizations that are delivering digital content that is accessible. So not only thinking of this as there's a market to go get, but also what is the disposable income that this market has? And research has shown that organizations that support people with disabilities are going to earn the business of individuals with disabilities. Myth number 2, and this kind of goes along with our numbers, is digital accessibility is only for those who are blind or have low vision. That couldn't be more of a false statement. There's so many more ways that we help in making your site accessible. Helps all different types of disabilities. And really we talked about a few of them from cognitive and so forth. But blind and low vision, it does have a massive impact by making your site accessible, but it is not the only one. Something like epilepsy, you'll see here, are prone to seizures. Something like epilepsy, if I come to a website, the website has flashing content, you have a rotating carousel that doesn't give me the ability to pause it, that can cause me to have a seizure if I have epilepsy, if I don't have that ability to actually customize that setting. Myth number 3, digital accessibility only applies if you have a brick and mortar store. And we'll talk a little bit about what this means from a higher level and then dive down on it. So the ADA was passed to make sure that individuals with disabilities have access to digital content. Here at AudioEye, we're actually really blessed to have Tony Coelho, who's a co-author of the Americans with Disabilities Act and a former congressman, be on our board. And really what the ADA was made out and really signed into act was to make sure that individuals with disabilities had access to brick and mortar stores. If we could think all the way back into the early 1990s, individuals with disabilities wouldn't have access to stores, they wouldn't have access to banks. It was really, something that grew with the passing of the ADA. The ADA has 3 different titles to it: Title I, Title II, and Title III. Title III is one of the biggest provisions, which states that people that have a disability need to have a reasonable accommodation to any public place of accommodation. So that means if I came into your bank and I have a wheelchair, it is my right to make sure that that bank has a ramp. If I'm blind and I come into your store, you have to have Braille on the bathrooms and so forth. What has really progressed as we have moved to more of a digital world is that public places of accommodation have to be accessible for people with disabilities, and that does include websites. Websites have been consistently ruled upon in courtrooms as a public place of accommodation, therefore making websites fall under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Not only does your site have to be accessible if you have a brick and mortar store, but it also is if you're only operating as an online, retailer, online storefront, so forth, you need to be accessible to the ADA Title III. So definitely something that we will talk a little bit more about as we talk about, the lawsuits that are coming from the ADA, and you might have heard about that by just doing some research or just in the news. But websites do need to be accessible under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title III, because they are a public place of accommodation, and that doesn't matter if you have a brick and mortar store or you are just, just providing services or information online digitally. Next myth, and this is for any clients that we have that are international here, is that digital accessibility applies only to websites in the United States. This right now is definitely, United States is one of the front leaders in growing and making sure that our sites are accessible. But we also have a lot of countries that are either even farther than us. Canada, Australia, and the UK also have legislation that is to protect rights in users with disabilities to have access to those sites. And we consistently are seeing a growing number of countries adopting digital accessibility. One of the great things around all the countries really coming together and making sure that digital accessibility is being looked at the forefront is that they're all following the same guideline, which is really, really good and creates consistency. That guideline is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. You'll hear the acronym WCAG, W-C-A-G, be utilized. So all of these, even though that Canada might have the AODA, or the United States might have ADA, they're all pointing to how you make your site accessible is by meeting the WCAG guidelines. And those guidelines.
Yep. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt in mid-sentence, but I did have I'm curious. Curious what makes a company subject to the laws of another country. Do you have to have like a domain that's like a .ca, for example, or do you have to have a locus or an operation in that country? Is there a test to decide whether you're subject to the laws of another, a simple test?
Yeah, so I think it is pretty much, are you operating and delivering your business to that right. country? So
you can't just somebody searching for you from another country doesn't qualify you. You have to have some sort of business operation. That makes sense.
That is correct. Like, for example, if I was a store in the United States, and let's say I was Tyler's Coffee Shop, and someone came to buy my coffee beans from Canada, I'm not really subject to the AODA, which is the Canadian accessibility laws. I'm subject to the ADA. There are probably certain legislation and rules out there that can get pretty gray along those guidelines, but it is where you are operating. And a lot of times what we see is organizations will have multiple domains, right? They'll have a domain that is serving to their Canadian customers. For example, Tommy Hilfiger is a client of ours. And there's different, domains that they're delivering to across the world. So each of those are different.
And this is more going back a slide or two, but I think I know the answer to this, but I'm curious. Social media presence, how is that governed? Is that simply the responsibility of Facebook, or does the does the brand bear any responsibility there for accessibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the platform, if I am a brand and I am promoting on Facebook, it is Facebook's requirement to make sure that that platform is accessible. But as a brand, what I should be doing to provide the best guideline and user experience is I should be following those accessibility guidelines that Facebook puts out for their platform. For example, if I am posting a photo on Facebook and that photo needs to have an alternative text, Facebook gives me that opportunity to tag my photo with my alternative text. It's like if you've ever used Instagram, Instagram gives you that capability as well. So it's really you as an organization should take it upon yourself or your social media presence to follow those guidelines. Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, all the social media platforms provide a guideline as to how you should post to create accessibility. But that ultimately the platform accessibility relies on the platform, which would be Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever social media you're using.
That makes sense. That's what I kind of thought. Okay.
Awesome. So number 5 on myths is digital accessibility doesn't apply if you have 15 or fewer employees. This kind of goes back to the brick and mortar side of it, right? The reference to public place of accommodation in Title III of the ADA makes no exemption for small companies. So, if I was a restaurant that only had 3 employees, I'm not exempt to have a ramp to get into my restaurant, right? It's the same thing digitally. I'm not exempt as a small to medium-sized business if I have less than 10 employees, 5 employees, to not have an accessible website. And this is really one we see in the SMB space, and we just try to promote it as well. Along the lines of this, right, is AudioEye is really out there trying to create products that are accessible and affordable for SMB organizations. It's kind of in our DNA, and I think our founder said it best one time, is that accessibility isn't truly accessible unless it's affordable. So we are out there building products and designing products and investing to really make it affordable to the SMBs, so that even organizations that have 1 or 2 employees and they're freelancers or they're very small organizations can afford to pay for their sites to be accessible. Number 6 on myths is web accessibility requirements can be ignored because litigation is frivolous and invalid. This is really drawn a lot of attention, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this slide here in particular. Digital accessibility has grown in the last 5 years exponentially because of lots of litigation and lawsuits that are being sent to large brands. You might have heard of the Domino's case, the NBA case, the MLB case, all the way down to SMB organizations. I can't tell you how many times a week we are getting calls from local coffee shops, small SMB providers that are getting hit with these lawsuits. And what these lawsuits are really driven by is that a plaintiff can come to your website and can scan your website for digital accessibility to see if it meets the WCAG success criteria. And if it doesn't, they can file a lawsuit or they can send a demand letter. And in this demand letter, what they'll ask for is a settlement fee. And for you to make your site accessible and show the continuous plan to make your site accessible. And we have seen a lot of times that SMBs will think, hey, this litigation can be ignored. I'm an SMB, this doesn't fall to me. But we have seen SMBs have to shut down their websites, have to do a lot of payouts to organizations because their sites aren't accessible. So I would just say,
Ty, what is the worst you've seen in terms of financial settlements? I mean, what is the sort of the extent of exposure financially, potentially anyway?
Absolutely. So for large brands, we've seen cases settle in the $1 million range. We've seen definitely cases go and have 7-figure settlements. We have seen in the SMB space it go. The biggest I've seen probably in SMB is $50,000 lawsuit in the SMB space. On average, it usually comes in around 15 to 10 is really the average.
That could still be a lot of money for a small business.
Yes, I can't tell you how many times, Charles, I've seen SMBs shut down their website rather than make it accessible. You know, that was one of the big things for us at AudioEye, saying why, you know, to make your site accessible if you're an SMB should not cost $5,000, $10,000. We need to make it as affordable as possible, you know, for these SMBs to make their sites accessible. So that is kind of that price range that we've seen. We'll move on here to just show some of these statistics as well. So this is really looking at the charts of what we saw in 2017, 2018, 19, 20, and then in 21, what we are anticipating. This is actual lawsuits, right? So this is not even demand letters. This is actual lawsuits that have been filed. We are anticipating that this will continue to double as the years go on. And you know, there could be a statement coming soon from the Department of Justice around digital accessibility, making a ruling which will expedite you know, this coming out. But just you know, our anticipation is that there's more than 200,000 demand letters that have been sent out. That is to SMBs and to large organizations around making their sites accessible. And it's continuing to just grow, especially with COVID. It's very easy for a plaintiff to come to a website, scan it, and make it, you know, and really try to file a lawsuit on it. The thing that we always tell our clients is, you know, be proactive in making your sites accessible. Do it because of, you know, what we talked about in the beginning, the population, the number of potential users that you could be marketing to, rather than the compliance. And compliance does drive it. We will be the first to admit that compliance is a driver of people adopting our solution, or just adopting digital accessibility. But when you do it for the right reasons, for the increased reach, the compliance comes secondary to that. And we always preach that to everyone that we are working with.
Quick question. I'm just curious. I know there's a scale issue here because you start at 814 at the bottom axis, but that is a steep growth. What is there something that's driving that? Is it just awareness, growing awareness that these laws are applicable? Is there some activism going on that's driving this? What do you what's sort of behind the accelerated growth here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that plaintiffs continue to win cases, right? The Domino's case last year went to the Supreme Court, where they actually denied to take the Domino's case, which then settled it, that, you know, Domino's needed to make their site accessible, which just the case law is really strong now, right? So plaintiffs have a really strong case law stating that website accessibility is public place of accommodation, therefore you need to make your sites accessible. And, you know, when these plaintiffs have it as easy as coming to your website, scanning your website with an automated service, and then saying, hey, you don't meet the requirements, it can drive, you know, the volume up. So it's probably a mixture of a lot of things. It's probably a mixture of awareness. It's a mixture of more businesses going online due to COVID and in the pandemic. And then on top of it, just, you know, the continued success that plaintiffs are having, and the rulings that websites are a public place of accommodation.
Okay.
Now back to getting a little bit out of compliance, right? The other than compliance, what is really good for your website when you make it accessible? One of the main things that we preach is the SEO benefits that come. If you think about it, SEO is looking at things like, did you add alt text? Is your heading structure in place? You know, do you have the correct labels? And that's really going to bump that SEO score. All of those things are actually related to making your site accessible and following that WCAG success criteria. So by doing that, you're actually going to increase your accessibility for your sites. So, you know, or your SEO for your site. So by making your site accessible, you will actually increase that SEO score, and we will see and anticipate that more accessibility, you know, remediations and things that you do to make your site accessible will be continued to be calculated in the SEO score, and increasing that optimization for your websites. So there are the benefits outside of the compliance and the continued reach and increase in reach that will help by making your site accessible. So kind of wrapping this all together here, why digital accessibility matters to business. The first that we always talk about is brand enhancement, right? By making sure that your site is accessible, you're going to include and open up more doors. 1 in 4 people, right, have a disability. So you're going to expand that customer base. You're going to be able to really promote that your organization is supporting individuals with disabilities, and that could increase the bottom line for those organizations. So that's really the first takeaway, right? Is do make your site accessible because of that expanded reach that you can have. Also, by doing that, you will fall and make sure that your site is accessible to the legal compliance requirements. So the WCAG, which is the guideline to make your site accessible, by following that guideline and meeting that guideline, your website will adhere to the ADA here in the States, which is making sure that public places of accommodation are accessible for people with disabilities. And then kind of wrapping it all together on what are those other benefits that are happening is you can improve your SEO, you can improve the tags in the search engine optimization that you have on your site by making it accessible for people with disabilities. So that's all I have today, Charles. I'm, again, open for some Q&A. Really thankful that everyone spent some time today to listen in and learn a little bit more about digital accessibility. And would love to kick it back to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, there's a few floating around here. So I'll start on where you ended, which was on SEO. Just could you talk more about how accessibility plays as a ranking factor for SEO? I mean, if you can kind of give it a sense of its importance compared to other things like, original content and, authoritative content and all the, accuracy, et cetera, all the different ranking factors. Where does accessibility fit into that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's growing, right? And also just the different provisions that you are doing by making your site accessible are gonna rank in. So, adding alt tags to your products. So if you're selling an e-commerce page and you have, products that are there, and instead of just keeping the tag blank, you're adding the correct tag as, this is a coffee bag, or this is, a t-shirt, for a male t-shirt that is gray. By adding that alt tag in there, it's going to increase that SEO. It's going to increase the way that the optimization is going to read it. So it's actually the things that are built within the WCAG success criteria that can directly map to things that you would do to increase your SEO on a website. And there's also some articles out there. We've co-authored an article with SEO Moz around the benefits with SEO and digital accessibility. But the easiest one to understand is something like an alt text, which is going to be beneficial to both.
Okay, great. So the fact that that you laid out all the myths suggests this is the answer to this is high, but maybe you have a specific on just the awareness level among SMBs for the fact that they are on the hook for compliance. Is it 5%, 10%? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, it's growing so rapidly. I would say if this was 3 years ago, the awareness was probably 5% of SMBs even understood what digital accessibility is. Better yet, not only trying to make their sites accessible. Where we are today, I would say that SMBs are probably 25% of the time they know what it is. They know that they should make their sites accessible, but either A, they can't afford it, or they haven't prioritized it. And really, that's what at AudioEye, by creating our our packages and our services, have really focused in on making it affordable for SMBs. So I would still say that the awareness level is very low. It is growing rapidly, but it might be a 25% awareness, but we're still seeing only 10% action happening there. I will say that the demand letters are really heating up. The litigation is really heating up, which will continue to increase the awareness. And it's really, the ability to market and the ability to create affordable products for SMBs, which we at AudioEye believe we are on the right path and have really started to do.
Okay, nothing like a compliance letter, right?
Exactly.
So you mentioned keeping the cost low. Can you offer any sense of, let's say I'm a small business, whatever type of business, but 20 employees, a website, maybe some, but nothing too involved. What is my investment to become compliant using your platform or just in general?
Absolutely, great question. So our services go by page views per client or per website. So for small SMBs, it can be $49 for our automated service, and then we have services that we sell on top of it that are manual testing and so forth per month. So it can be our starting packages really start around the $49 per month, and then go from there between how many services you want to add on and so forth.
But it's a subscription model, is it?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. And what is your go-to market for the small business community? Is kind of more of a locology analyst question. Are you a channel partner strategy, or do you direct sales, a little both? How does that work?
I would say we are definitely a little bit of both. We do have a lot of we do a lot of direct business. We do a lot of channel partners. Like one of the locology members that we are partners with is Duda. We're partners with Thrive and Haibu as well. So it really is a little bit of both on that.
But one way to go to market for you is to embed your solution in a site builder platform, for example.
That is correct. Yeah, it's really good for us on site builder platforms. And then on top of just being in site builder platforms, we can offer discounts. We can really, a lot of site builders, what we're seeing with our service now, are just adding it in as a benefit and utilizing it as a competitive advantage.
Got it. Okay. Now, this is a sort of broader question, kind of goes back to the early part of the presentation when we were talking about it's not just, the visually impaired, it's a more expansive definition of disability that is impacted by what you're working on. Do you have a sense of whether sort of the concept of disability is an evolving thing, and is it going to grow over time, and is it, do you sort of look ahead and say, okay, what will disability mean in 5 years, and will we have to build a new set of products for that? How do you kind of game plan the future around trends in disability? I don't know if trends is the right way to put it.
One of the big things that we're looking at, right, is like how can we serve individuals with disabilities and make our products as accessible with the adapting technology that we go with, right? VR is becoming something that's really huge.
Right.
Websites are becoming a little bit more dynamic, more personalized. So we're looking at ways to personalize settings based upon, individuals with disabilities, and giving the user the ability to opt what they would like to access, on top of making sure websites are providing that type of code-based infrastructure for individuals with disabilities to access. Another thing that I would say that we are really looking into is really the nomenclature of a temporary or situational disability, which is, there's 3 different types of disability. There's a permanent disability, there's temporary disability, and then there's a situational disability. And what a temporary disability would be is something like, I just broke my arm, so I have no ability to utilize my left hand. A situational disability would be something like I'm carrying my baby, or I'm pushing a stroller, or I'm cooking and I want to have an article read to me. So what we're really starting to look at is how can we take accessibility and build it into being accessible beyond just making sites compliant, but also now looking at how can you get accessible in a temporary or situational disability to access something like driving. Is there something that we can build within a website that'll help you be able to have a website read to you while you are driving, so forth. So that is something that's really big on our roadmap, as we continue to evolve. But right now, we're very much on the scratching surface of just getting organizations to adopt this, so that we can increase that over over time.
Well, what you were just talking about is like moving into the customer experience UX design space more so beyond simply accessibility compliance.
That is
Is that
correct.
fair?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
we're really looking at UX and looking at, you know, this across the board as to how we can increase. And I think personalized settings is a big thing as well. Like in our solution today, you can change the color contrast of a website, which is, you know, just a very subtle thing. It's a very simplistic thing that you can do, but how many times does that help individuals, you know, read and consume content?
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate uh, your your information today and your insights on this space we haven't really spent a lot of time on till now in Locology. So this is great. Really appreciate it. Lizzie, I don't know if you have any final comments. Otherwise, Lizzie can take us out.
Awesome. No, I just really appreciate, you know, the opportunity to speak today. And again, you know, digital accessibility is something that we just ask everyone does for the right reasons. And there's a lot of benefit that comes from really showing and being inclusive to individuals with disabilities. But, you know, thanks again, Charles, and everyone for the opportunity today.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ty and AudioEye for today's presentation. It was great. And also thank you, Charles, from Locology for participating. Lots of great questions and discussions. Just a few more items from Locology before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, locology.com. Just navigate to Research and Resources and to the drop-down of webinars. If your question was not answered today, we will have those questions sent over to AudioEye so they can follow up with answers. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to visit locology.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. I hope everyone has a great day.